1. Delivery danger. I ordered food from my favorite restaurant, eager for a relaxing evening at home after a long day at work. The estimated delivery time was 45 minutes, so I settled in to watch some TV while I waited. When the doorbell rang, I jumped up to answer it. Standing on the doorstep was a man I didn't recognize. He had a scruffy beard and a greasy ponytail, and his eyes looked wild. "Delivery for you," he said gruffly, thrusting a paper bag at me. I took the bag and handed him the money, hoping he would leave quickly, but instead he lingered on the porch, staring at me with unsettling intensity. "You're really pretty," he said suddenly, taking a step closer to me. "Do you live alone?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "That's none of your business," I said firmly, trying to close the door. But he put his foot in the way, blocking me. "Come on, baby," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Let's have some fun." I tried to push past him, but he was too strong. I felt a surge of panic as he grabbed my arm and pulled me towards. I struggled against him, but his grip was too tight. Fear coursed through my veins as I realized I was in danger. I tried to scream, but he covered my mouth with his hand. "Shh, don't make a sound," he hissed. "I just want to have some fun with you." Tears welled up in my eyes as I frantically searched for a way out. I had never been in this kind of situation before, and I didn't know what to do. My mind raced as I tried to come up with a plan. Suddenly, I remembered the pepper spray my friend had given me for protection. I'd never used it before, but I knew I had to try. I fumbled in my purse for the small canister, praying it was still there. When I finally found it, I aimed it at the man's face and pressed down on the trigger. He recoiled in pain, clutching at his eyes and howling. I took advantage of his momentary weakness to break free and run inside my house, slamming the door shut behind me. I leaned against the door, breathing heavily and shaking with adrenaline. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I'd always thought of myself as a strong, independent woman, but in that moment, I felt helpless and vulnerable. I knew I had to call the police, but I was too scared to move. I sat on the floor, clutching the pepper spray and waiting for what felt like hours. Finally, I heard the sound of sirens outside. I breathed a sigh of relief, knowing help was on the way. When the police arrived, they found the man still writhing in pain on my porch. They arrested him and took him away, but I couldn't get rid of the feeling of unease that lingered in my stomach. I had always felt safe in my own home, but now that sense of security had been shattered. Over the next few days, I found myself jumping at every sound and constantly checking the locks on my doors and windows. I couldn't shake the feeling that he might come back, or that there were others out there like him. I knew I needed to take action to protect myself. I signed up for self-defense classes and invested in a security system for my home. I made sure to always be aware of my surroundings and to never let my guard down. Slowly but surely, I began to feel like myself again. I was still shaken by the experience, but I refused to let it control my life. I was determined to take back my sense of safety and security. As time passed, the memory of that night began to fade, but I never forgot the lesson it taught me, that danger can lurk in even the most unexpected places, that it's up to us to be prepared and vigilant. I'm grateful for the pepper spray that saved me that night, and for the support of my friends and family who helped me get through the aftermath. But most of all, I'm grateful for the reminder that I'm strong and capable, and that I have the power to protect myself and those I love. From that moment on, I made a promise to myself to always be prepared, to never let my guard down, and to never forget the value of my own safety and well-being. I also made the point to share my story with others, to raise awareness about the importance of self-defense and staying alert to potential danger. I volunteered at local community events, teaching others about basic self-defense techniques and sharing my story as a cautionary tale. Through these efforts, I found a sense of purpose and empowerment. I realized that I could use my experience to help others, to make a difference in my community, and to spread awareness about the importance of staying safe. Years later, I look back on that night as a turning point in my life. It was a terrifying and traumatic experience, but it taught me valuable lessons about strength, resilience, and the power of community. I still order food from my favorite restaurant, but now I always make sure to check the delivery person's identification and to stay alert to potential danger. And I always keep my pepper spray close at hand, a reminder of the importance of being prepared and staying safe. Looking back, I'm grateful for the lessons I learned and the person I became as a result of the harrowing experience. And I know that no matter what challenges come my way, I have the strength and resilience to overcome them. 2. Delivery misunderstanding. I had been working as a food delivery man for years, and despite the challenges that came with the job, I enjoyed the independence it offered. Riding through the bustling streets of the city on my trusty bike, I had seen it all: bad weather, rude customers, and unexpected obstacles, but nothing had prepared me for the horror that awaited me that night. I had received an order to deliver food to a customer on the outskirts of the city. It was a long ride, but I didn't mind. I had my music to keep me company and a promise of a decent tip at the end of it all. As I turned onto a quiet street, I heard a strange noise coming from my bike. I stopped to check it out and found that my rear tire had blown out. I cursed under my breath, knowing that I didn't have a spare tire or any tools to fix it. And to make matters worse, my phone had died earlier in the day, so I couldn't call for help. I looked around, hoping to see a bike shop or a gas station that might be open, but all I could see were darkened houses and quiet streets. I was about to give up hope when I saw a light in the distance. It was a small house, tucked away from the road, but it was the only sign of life that I could see. I took a deep breath and headed towards the house, hoping that whoever lived there would be able to help me. As I got closer, I could see that the house was old and run down, with peeling paint and a crooked roof. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was safe to knock on the door, but I was desperate for help, and the thought of spending the night on the street with a broken bike was too much to bear. I walked up to the door and knocked loudly. For a few moments, there was no answer, and I began to wonder if anyone was home. But just as I was about to give up and leave, I heard footsteps approaching the door. The door creaked open, and an old woman peered out at me. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice quivering. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said. "My bike tire blew out, and I don't have a spare or any tools to fix it. I was wondering if I could use your phone to call for help." The old woman looked at me for a moment, her eyes scanning me up and down, before she finally nodded and opened the door wider, motioning for me to come inside. "Thank you so much," I said, relieved to have found some help at last. The old woman led me through the cluttered living room and into the kitchen, where she pointed to the phone on the wall. "You can use the phone over there," she said, before shuffling out of the room. I picked up the phone and tried to dial my boss's number, but there was no dial tone. I tried again and again, but still, nothing. Frustrated and anxious, I turned around to leave the house when I was suddenly face to face with a man who had just walked in. I was taken aback by his sudden appearance and found myself staring into the cold, menacing eyes of a young man who was clearly the son of the old woman. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" he snarled, stepping closer to me. "I'm sorry," I stammered, backing away. "I was just trying to get some help with my bike." The man didn't seem to believe me and took another step closer, his fists clenched tightly. "I think you're lying," he spat. "You're just trying to rob us, aren't you?" I shook my head vigorously, trying to explain my situation, but the man didn't seem to listen. He lunged forward, and I barely had time to duck as he swung a fist at me. I stumbled backwards, knocking over a chair and sending it crashing to the ground. The man was relentless, and he kept coming at me, fists flying. I tried to defend myself, but I was no match for him. I was backed up against the wall, and I knew I was in serious trouble. As the man continued to swing at me, I scrambled to find a way out of the kitchen, but the old woman had blocked the doorway, and I couldn't get past her without risking more violence. I tried to reason with the man, but he was beyond reason. He kept shouting that I was a thief and that he would teach me a lesson. I was trapped with no phone, no help, and no way out. The man continued to pummel me with his fists, and I could feel the blood trickling down my face. At some point, I must have blacked out because the next thing I knew, I was lying on the floor, surrounded by darkness. When I opened my eyes, I saw that I was in a small, dimly lit room. There was no furniture, no windows, and no door. I was completely alone. My head throbbed with pain, and I could barely move. I knew I had to get out of there, but there seemed to be no way to escape. I don't know how long I was in that room. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly, and I lost track of how many hours had passed. The only thing that kept me going was the thought of my family and the hope that someone would come looking for me. Eventually, I heard the sound of footsteps outside the room. I could hear voices, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. The next thing I knew, the door to the room was opening and 2 police officers were standing in front of me. They helped me to my feet, and one of them handed me a bottle of water. I drank it greedily, my throat dry from days of not speaking. "We received a call from the son of the woman who found you," one of the officers said. "He reported that you had broken into their home and attacked him." I shook my head, trying to explain what had really happened, but the words came out slurred and garbled. The officers exchanged a look, and one of them said, "Let's take him to the hospital first. He needs medical attention." At the hospital, I was treated for my injuries, and the police officers stayed with me to take my statement. I told them everything that had happened, how I had been lost and looking for help when I stumbled upon the old woman's house. They listened carefully, and when I was finished, they nodded understandingly. "It seems like a big misunderstanding," one of them said. "We'll talk to the family and try to sort things out." A few days later, the police officers returned to the hospital to give me an update. They had talked to the family and explained the situation, and the family had apologized for the mistake. "We're sorry about what happened," one of the officers said, "but we're glad you're okay. Is there anything else we can do for you?" I shook my head, grateful for their help. "No, I just want to go home and be with my family," I said. As I settled back into my normal routine, I could feel that something wasn't quite right. Every time I walked past a dark alley or heard footsteps behind me, my heart would start racing and my palms would become slick with sweat. I tried to tell myself that it was just my imagination, but I knew deep down that I was still traumatized by what had happened to me. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a noise outside my bedroom window. At first, I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the wind or an animal, but the noise persisted, growing louder and more insistent. Trembling with fear, I approached the window and peered out into the darkness. There was nothing there, but I could feel that I was being watched. The next day, I went to the police station to report what had happened. They listened to my story, but there was nothing they could do. Without any evidence or a suspect, there was no way to pursue any investigation. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, but the feeling of being watched never went away. I started avoiding going out at night and became more paranoid with each passing day. One night, as I was walking home from work, I felt a sudden gust of wind. As I looked up, I saw a figure standing at the end of the alley, watching me intently. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure stepped out of the shadows, revealing a face that I recognized all too well. It was the son of the old woman who had attacked me. He started walking towards me, and I knew I had to run. I turned around and sprinted down the street, my heart racing with terror. I don't know how long I ran, but when I finally stopped, I was gasping for breath, and my legs felt like jelly. As I caught my breath, I realized that I had left my phone at home and had no way of calling for help. Suddenly, I heard footsteps approaching, and I knew I was in deep trouble. I turned around and saw the son of the old woman standing there, his eyes cold and menacing. "Did you really think you could get away from me?" he sneered. "I've been watching you for months, and now I'm going to make you pay for what you did to my family." My heart sank, and I knew that there was no way out. I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable blow. But it never came. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my bed, sweating profusely. It was all just a nightmare, a terrifying reminder of what had happened to me. But even though it was just a dream, I knew that the fear and trauma would stay with me for a long time to come.